Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you everyone for joining for another of our webinars. Um, and this time, I'm very pleased to introduce our guest. We've worked in the past together. Recently with the, as some of you might know, in the UK, we're in lockdown at present. So alhamdulillah, we have managed to do a really good event encouraging in the Muslim community how to cope with the lockdown, positive things we can do from a mental health perspective in that regard. We're joined by Zabair Hussain, and he currently works in the NHS in the famous IAPT service, I believe at present, and he has a focus on the BAME community. We're very delighted he can join us today, considering that it is we're looking at a CBT perspective. I just want to start off, if it's okay, with a few verses from the Quran in kind of my reflection. And a lot of people sometimes think that perhaps there's no psychology, or the Islam in psychology are at ends, or they don't meet together. I just wanted to go through some verses of Surah Al-Mudassir before we start and have a little bit of an analysis. Hopefully you can see this. These are verses from 19 to 25, and we'll start Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ. And again, this is a very interesting statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes. Is he's describing this individual, and he's saying, may this person be destroyed for how he deliberated, or qaddar can also mean thought. So he's basically saying, may this person be destroyed to what his thinking is. Now, not only does he do that, he says that in a second verse, he says, Summa kutila kaifa qaddar. Again, he emphasizes that this thinking or this deliberation is a negative form of thinking, or it isn't a good form of thought. Now, in a very interesting next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Summa nazar. And again, see, the summa is being followed from the verses. So what we're seeing is there's a continuity. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically showing is snapshots of how this individual is changing. So then he considered, now it's or he sees we can see from qadr, it's now nazar, so we're changing, and then it has an impact on his body, where we say summa abasa wa bassar, so he frowned and scowled. So we can see at the start of the verses where it's just the thinking which is being affected, but now his viewpoint, his nazar, or how he's seeing things, has evolved to a behavioral change into now that he is frowning and scowling. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala carries in the next verse says, Summa adbara wastakbar. Adbara as in he turned back. Now again, this is a behavioral change. And now actually what we're going to is a state. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, not only is a behavior, he's now changed to a state of being arrogant. Now, interestingly, in this webinar, we're talking about self-esteem, and arrogance is sometimes considered too much kind of esteem in that respect. And now in the verses which follow, we see actual what he's thinking or what he's saying. So he's saying فَقَالَ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سَحْرٌ يُسْرٌ, as in this is not just magic. So he's now communicating what in verse 19, maybe what he was thinking in his head. And the verse carries on, in haza illa qawl al-bashar, as in, obviously the context of this verse when he's talking to the prophet, and this person is arguing that this, whatever the prophet is saying is not true, or it's magic, basically. So I wanted to introduce with these verses because a lot of the time people argue and they say, oh, there's no sense of cognitive behavioral indication in Islam. And we can clearly see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully, he says, summa, 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 and he's showing us the different states where thought then becomes a behavior or a thought or a state of being. So inshallah, in this webinar, we'll be discussing how to build self-esteem. And for me, at least, self-esteem was one of the huge factors in my own work when navigating through same-sex attractions. And I think it was a lot of the time that I felt that, oh, I can't even discuss this, or if people knew what the real me was, they wouldn't accept me, or these people seem, people in terms when we have the attractions, these people are so much better than me, or, they have so much more. And my self-esteem would constantly be challenged when I had those types of emotions and those types of feelings. And inshallah, we're very pleased and grateful to have Brother Zabair with us today. And inshallah, I'll pass on to him now to take us through this webinar. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Zabair. Thank you for joining.
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Ali. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction as well. Thank you.
So would you like to go a little bit more about your work and what you presently, are working on, or the projects you're working on?
Sure, of course. So as you mentioned, very kindly, I think there's certain concepts and unfortunately sometimes misconceptions about CBT in terms of how we can relate CBT, especially a Western model of psychotherapy, to religion or even spirituality. And inshallah, I'm hoping that we can address some of those difficulties today, and also think about how to make it more spiritually connected and more adapted on a cultural level. But before we get into that, of course, as Brother Ali mentioned, my name is Zabair Hussain. I'm a cognitive behavioural psychotherapist. So I work in the NHS, and I've been working in mental health for around 15 years now. I did my, just a bit of background about myself. I did my undergraduate in Manchester, then I did my master's in Leeds, and then clinical training in Liverpool and Sheffield. And I guess whilst I was doing all my kind of academic work, but also my clinical work, about that really, and
think brother might be having some technical difficulties. Inshallah, he'd be joining us again. So yes, so thanks. I'm seeing a lot of messages come up. Just to go through, we will have a opportunity for Q&A. Just be aware that it is at present it's live, so you'll see the Q&A box at the bottom. You can ask questions at any time. We'll go at the end and go through it. You can also ask them anonymously, so you can then vote as well the questions that you would like to ask. The discussion today at present is to do around self-esteem, and inshallah we'll be navigating this topic. So yes, we'll be just waiting until Brother Zabair can join us. And yes, so inshallah we will resume shortly. Okay. Seems like...
Sorry, I think I got disconnected there.
That's absolutely fine. So yes, I'll just share the screen again.
This is the joys of working remotely.
I know.
Sorry, I'm not sure how much you heard or where we got to.
You were describing your, I think you were saying, clinical practice in Liverpool, did you say?
Yeah. Sorry, I was describing just a bit about my academic background and clinical background as well, and just giving some insight in terms of the projects that I do on the side. I do a lot of projects in terms of providing adaptive therapy to people from maybe minority backgrounds. So this can be Black and Asian ethnic minorities, but it can also be people from diverse backgrounds. So anybody, for example, with a disability, but also think about sexuality as well. Often that is something that gets overlooked and overmissed in mainstream psychotherapy models and mainstream health services, especially the mental health services as well. I'm thinking about how we can provide sensitive and appropriate therapy for this group of people as well, and seeing how their needs are met. And, essentially one thing that I'm going to say about today's talk is that self-esteem is extremely subjective. We all have our own interpretations, own thoughts, own feelings and beliefs about self-esteem. And I'd really, really encourage anyone, if they want to share an experience, if they want to have some thoughts about this, please, do message, and we'll try addressing some of your questions as well, because it'd be really useful to get some interaction there and some insight and information of other people's experiences as well when talking about self-esteem. And at times when we talk about self-esteem, it can be quite an abstract idea. It's hard to quantify self-esteem. And this is why I'm really going to stress in this talk, there's no right or wrong. CBT is a highly effective model for working, but it doesn't have all the answers. So, take what works for you today and think about, okay, how can I apply this information to myself? And essentially what I want to do is provide an overview of self-esteem, giving some understanding of what even is self-esteem. How do we view it? How do we think about it? Thinking about our backgrounds and our upbringings and early life experiences and what may have influenced the way we feel about ourselves in the here and now. Also thinking about if our needs were not met when we were growing up, or even in our current life, how that has impacted our self-esteem, and some of the adaptive and maladaptive behaviors we may use to meet some of our needs. So these are the kind of things that I will be covering today. And then finally, we will be talking about value-based living, looking at spirituality and your self-esteem, and then looking at how we can be compassionate when having some of those intrusive and difficult thoughts and feelings, and essentially not looking at it in a judgmental sense. We're going to be extremely compassionate here and thinking about it in a non-judgmental manner when thinking about self-esteem. So as I mentioned, if any questions do pop up, feel free to ask me at any point. So let's think about this, the kind of basics. How do we even describe self-esteem? Like I said, it's a very abstract kind of idea, but essentially when we, I guess I wanted to go back to the dictionary definition of self-esteem. And one thing that really struck out for me, when we talk about esteem, we think about how we give it some sort of value, how we give it some sort of approval. And one really interesting word which stood out for me in the definition was affection and cordiality. Because I think we can all relate to this, because again, we've all had moments, we've all got some level of low self-esteem. We cannot hide that, and that's something we need to accept. It's so interesting, isn't it, how when we might talk about ourselves, how that approval, cordiality, and affection can be diminished, and we can become quite critical with ourselves as well. So thinking about that, even the basic definition of self-esteem or esteem involves value something or valuing something and holding it with much price. And when we think about our own self-esteem, this is our own appraisal of ourselves. And this is a term that we use in CBT a lot in terms of appraisal, how we give that information or experience some sort of meaning. How do we hold it and process it in our minds, and how do we encode it in our minds? So when we think about self-esteem in a CBT model, what we are talking about there is the evaluation we give ourselves, how we evaluate ourselves in certain tasks, certain situations, certain relationships, and certain experiences. And of course, self-esteem is very closely connected to self-worth, self-respect, self-regard, and self-acceptance as well. And one thing that I'd really like to stress at this point, I think, it goes without saying, we all have good and bad sides to us. We all have things that we might not like about ourselves. We all have things that we do like about ourselves. Sometimes some people might talk on a superficial level, or maybe I don't like the way I look, maybe I wish I was taller, maybe I was a bit slimmer. But I guess we're going that level deeper here, thinking about what personality traits I might have, what thoughts I might have, what characteristics I might have that I may not like about myself, that I do not value, prize, or approve of. But then thinking about, okay, that's something that might not never go, or that might not be something that I can just throw away, out of my mind. And this is where self-acceptance comes into it. And we will be talking about self-acceptance later on as well, because it's so easy to accept everything good and dismiss everything bad. And even thinking about these labels, good, bad, how useful they are when judging ourselves. And these are some of the kind of things that I will be touching on, some of the themes that I will be touching on, even the language that we use, even the kind of words that we use in the way we appraise ourselves and appraise our self-image as well. Of course, self-esteem is something that it does not happen in isolation. Often when we talk about self-esteem, and I think often there's a perception in Western cultures that therapy tends to focus on the individual. But what we do know, self-esteem does not just come from the individual, there's collective self-esteem as well. So when we think about myself, my worth, my value, my effectiveness in a piece of work or in a group, it's not in isolation. We're talking about your self-esteem as part of a wider context as well. So you part of a group. So this, when I say group, it can refer to a family, it can refer to a religion, it can refer to a society, it can refer to a culture. I think it'd be really naive if we think about self-esteem and we think about certain thoughts, behaviors, and action all in isolation. And this is something that I really wanted to stress today, that self-esteem is not a process that occurs in isolation. It occurs as a collective almost effort as well. We belong to certain groups, we belong to certain religions, we belong to certain societies, cultures, ethnicities, families, and often the way we are appraised and considered worthy in those groups, religions, and cultures, that can also influence your self-esteem as well. So self-esteem doesn't just occur in the isolation, it occurs as a collective self-esteem, and it's thinking about you as a belonging in these groups or larger groups as well, and how you praise yourself and how others maybe appraise themselves as well.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. I mean, I know in the experience, certainly from my experience and maybe some of the viewers, is in terms of sexuality or in terms of gender identity, like if we use the terms as a woman amongst women or as a man amongst men, I am, because a lot of the times we or we say as a Muslim among the Ummah, for example, we have this collective type, and I think it's very important not to, sometimes in the therapeutic alliance, they say, oh, but we want to know what the individual is feeling. But what they don't realize is for certain people, the community or their faith community, or the fact that they have an idea that they never fitted in, that plays into a huge part. So, we have this theme of internal locus of evaluation, external locus of evaluation. So some people have a very external locus where the self-esteem is, the collective self-esteem is more dominant than the personal self-esteem. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much for noting that, Ali, because I think that's really true, because just from my experience in clinic, what I found really interesting, the individual person, male or female, may have, okay-ish regard for themselves or even high regard for themselves. But what they find more threatening is not maybe how critical they are to themselves, but maybe how the collective group or society or culture may regard them. And I always find that really interesting. So your own self-esteem may be okay. You may have reached milestones in your life. So you may have got to a certain job. You may have, I don't know, a certain degree, or, met certain things, bought a house, all those kind of things. And on that kind of materialistic kind of social expectations level, you may be doing okay, and therefore your self-esteem is okay in that respect. Unfortunately, when I've met in therapy, when clients disclose to me, actually, I'm having these thoughts and feelings, what they find more threatening is how they are then going to be appraised in the community, and how threatened they become then due to that worry of how their place will be lost in the community. And it's so interesting, because it sounds like almost in therapy at times that there's less importance on me, my understanding what I want. There's more importance of how others are going to perceive me, and the threat of others as well, and my position in community. And this is important when we think about individual self-esteem and collective self-esteem, that this is something we need to be mindful about. Self-esteem does not just come from within, it's what we experience from the people around us as well, and what they give us to help us form our self-image and sense of self as well. So moving on to the next part, and thinking about how our self-esteem is even formed, and what influences our self-esteem. I guess we need to look at the individual, the whole individual, not just taking a kind of reductionist kind of approach, but looking at the whole self, and looking at all your experiences all together, and thinking about how you might be performing in those areas of your life, or what those areas of life have given you to form your current self-esteem, and maybe evaluating where some of these difficulties come from as well. I'm a great believer in reflective practice, and knowledge is power. The more you understand about yourself and self-esteem, the more you will be able to understand why you behave in the way you do, and why you think in the way you do as well. So if we look at the whole person, we need to think about genetics. We need to be thinking about our upbringing, our family, what our relationship was like maybe with our parents, mum, dad, what our relationship was like with our teachers, what was our early social life like. We need to be thinking about our religion and culture. What are our expectations within our culture, society, and our religion as well? How I should be looking, how I should be behaving. These shoulds and musts all influence your self-esteem, because these are all rules and all expectations which supposedly we need to be living by. Of course, people might look at their finances, their career, their academia. All these kind of ideas will influence your self-esteem as well, and your sense of self in a community and within society as well. And of course, your spirituality and your relationships as well. Your relationships have a massive impact on your self-esteem. But we do know toxic and unhealthy relationships can really batter your self-esteem and really reduce your self-esteem, whereas healthy relationships can really empower you and enable you as well. And this is something we'll be talking more in detail about, how relationships impact our self-esteem as well, and what we could consider healthy or unhealthy relationships and what impact they have on our self-esteem as well. So essentially, when using the CBT model, I guess the kind of main premise of CBT and understanding is CBT is thinking about how our thoughts impact our feelings, and how our feelings impact the way we behave. And those who may have had experience of whether practicing CBT themselves or even receiving CBT therapy, you would have noticed there's a lot of a lot of emphasis on your cognitions, on your thoughts and your thinking processes, because essentially it's how we think that can really influence, you know, the way we feel about ourselves and the way we behave and react to our situations as well. And this is the main core component of CBT. And I really like this quote because I think it just summarizes CBT so well, that we are not disturbed by what happens to us, but by our thoughts and what has happened to us. So it's, again, talking about that appraisal, talking about what sense we make situations, what messages we receive from situations, and how we encode them, and how that builds our sense of self as well. And ultimately, unfortunately, what can happen is that if we do develop unhelpful or negative thinking styles, those unhelpful and negative thinking styles can then be reflected in our behaviors as well. And I will be coming into more detail about that later on in terms of what we might see as helpful or unhelpful or adaptive or maladaptive behaviors. And of course, thinking about in the background, thinking about your sense of self, your position in society, your position with yourself as well, what's happening to your esteem when you've got certain thoughts, when you have certain behaviors, but also thinking about how to deal with that matter if I am having certain thoughts, the same-sex attraction thoughts as well, thinking about where are they coming from, what meaning am I giving them, what sense am I making of these, and how am I acting upon them? So essentially, CBT looking at your thoughts, how they impact the way you feel and behave. And I guess what we are doing today is using that CBT model to possibly give that some sort of explanation in terms of how same-sex attraction thoughts can occur, and then how our behaviors may help those thoughts or work against those thoughts as well. So what I've done here, I won't go into this in too much detail. This is something that we do in the therapy room with or most of our clients. This is what we call a formulation. And this formulation, I guess another word for a formulation is it's a map. It gives some sort of insight and understanding in terms of why you are feeling the way you are about yourself in the here and now, but also thinking about where these thoughts come from. You know, when we have difficult thoughts or difficult feelings, we don't just randomly wake up one day to have these thoughts and feelings. They've come from somewhere, you know. Often people might ask you, you know, what triggered these thoughts? What triggered these feelings? And it takes a lot of time and attention to think about, okay, how I might have developed these thoughts over time and how I may have developed these feelings over time. And to get that information, you need a really safe place, a really safe, compassionate and non-judgmental place to really access these thoughts access these feelings and accessing these behaviors as well. This is not something that occurs in one session. Something like this, a formulation, can take quite a long time. And the reason for that is when we do therapy, we're looking at all your early life experiences and significant events in your life through your developmental years as well. And it can be difficult disclosing certain events in your life or certain relationships in your life. And this is why it can be quite time consuming, because it takes trust. It takes that non-judgmental place to release that information as well. And it takes compassion. Essentially, as a therapist, you know, I'm there to judge my clients. I'm not there to tell them what is right or wrong. I guess we are both on a journey to discover what is good for you and what's helpful for you, and what is unhelpful, then we can start addressing that. You know, I think that's one of the main things that we need to think about in therapy whenever somebody comes to me, especially with somebody who's been experiencing same-sex attraction thoughts. A massive worry is, you know, what's my therapist going to say? My therapist is a Muslim as well. You know, are they going to come out with all like Quranic kind of quotes, ideas? Are they going to judge me? You know, I think unfortunately people may have had negative experiences which may have fueled that perception that if you go to, you know, a Muslim therapist, you're just going to get bombarded with these, with the religious talk. And I guess essentially we're not focusing on that. We're looking at you as a person on a humanitarian level, on a non-judgmental level. Because if we do not do that and do not look through the non-judgmental lens, we will never be able to understand why you are feeling the way you feel, because we won't be able to access any of your cognitions or your past history. And of course, you wouldn't be feeling comfortable to disclose that information to your therapist as well. And I guess, you know, self-esteem can be seen as a bit of an iceberg. We only see the bits at the top. Somebody might be a bit nervous, somebody might not engage so well socially, somebody may get, I don't know, a bit anxious in social situations. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's usually so much more under there. And if you're suffering from low self-esteem anyway, you're going to have difficulties trusting the other person. And that relationship can be recreated in the therapy room as well. So if you're going to struggle trusting your therapist as well, of course, it's going to be difficult and it's going to take time to open up. So do hang in there. Eventually, when that occurs, where you do start trusting your therapist, creating that kind of non-judgmental, trusting relationship, a lot can happen then in that space, and that can really help. So sorry, I was digressing there. This is one of the models, of course, that we use, and it's kind of thinking about, okay, what can impact my self-esteem and what can impact my understanding of self, sense of self, but also thinking about if I am experiencing thoughts of a same-sex attraction, what can be one of the reasons which I might be experiencing these thoughts. So we need to look at the childhood, upbringing, relationships with the significant others, your parents, your caregivers. And I guess a lot of role modeling happens in our younger years as well. So really exploring early life relationships. Trauma, unfortunately, I see a lot of clients who have suffered some pretty horrible, horrible trauma, and that has really influenced the way they see themselves, the world, and others around them. And one thing that I'd really like to stress here as well, if somebody has experienced a lot of neglect and trauma in their early life as well, that will impact their self-esteem, but it will also impact the way they have their needs met. And I will talk about this in more detail in the next couple of slides, because essentially these are just the factors which impact our self-esteem. But also something really important in this is how our needs are being met. So if I'm being bullied, for example, I might feel vulnerable. So how is that need being met if I'm feeling vulnerable? Okay. If I've experienced some sort of trauma, I might not feel safe, I might feel vulnerable, I might feel unworthy. Again, how are all those emotional needs being met? And that's something really important we need to think about when we experience same-sex attraction thoughts and how our needs are being met. All these experiences will influence your self-esteem and your development, of no doubt. And I think something that I left to the bottom 2 points, society and expectations, I think that's massive, you know, especially in this day and age in terms of the social media age as well. Expectations on younger people have increased massively. And I think the more the expectations grow, the more confusion grows as well, because where do I belong then? You know, there's a certain group telling me I need to be like this. There's a certain maybe group telling me I need to be like this. And one group might conflict how I should be with the other group as well. And this can really, again, impact your self-esteem and really impact your individual self. You know, what's my identity then? There's so many expectations. My parents are expecting X, Y, Z of me. My ex-parents are expecting me to get married, you know, have children, da, da, da. But then I might be socializing with a lot of people who are completely against that. And they believe in individual self and just kind of focus on yourself, invest in yourself. So there's a massive conflict, and where there's conflict, of course, confusion occurs. And often where there's conflict, again, there's a need that needs to be met there, and thinking about how those needs are being met as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely beautifully put. And, you know, that we see there's so much and strong support where, you know, people will come in and they'll say, and I ask them, I'm saying, what is it that you want, you know, and echoing what Brother Zabair has just discussed about client self-determination, that actually it's what they want, not what the society wants, not what label they want to put us on us, you know, or not, so I can fit in with the society. You know, so much is like we talk about same-sex attractions. Well, actually, same-sex attractions are, for us, they're coming from a place which is natural for us. So when it's coming from a place where it's natural, why is there shame in discussing about that? You know, the way that I act upon it might be different, or I choose to act upon it from distance, but the existence of that is shared, you know. So like a lot of the times, you know, people come to me and they say, oh, are we at odds with people who take a sexual identity, say even straight, you know, do they say, well, are you straight or are you gay? How would you identify? And I say, well, I don't take an identity. I don't fit in that box. I'm just saying I am me, you know. So why do we need this expectation to fit in certain boxes which the society puts upon us? And I think this is, especially in Muslim communities as well, and other communities, is this conflict of, am I people pleasing? Am I, you know, being in that state where I'm not actually addressing what's true and real for me and what my value is? Yes, I may have a conflict between my faith is saying this and my natural desire is saying this. You know, there may be a conflict in that, but there isn't a conflict of a level where we're saying, actually, my desire is saying this, and that's what I want to be doing, as versus to what my society is saying, and I don't want to be doing that, you know. So I think it's what you touched upon earlier, is the person's own self-determination, which is coming from their selves, not guided by the therapist, not guided by any other external party, is very, very important in this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for touching on those, you know, topics, something about self-determination and self-empowerment, really, but also I think labeling, you know, that can have such an impact on our self-esteem. Just a bit of self-disclosure, I'm from the Pakistani community, and often there's some very, very negative connotations and very derogatory words to label people who are experiencing thoughts of same-sex attraction, who or may identify themselves as bisexual, gay, or lesbian, or whatever. And unfortunately, those labels given by the society will impact your self-esteem. And it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So society sees me in this way, so maybe I should behave in this way as well. And it becomes almost a self-sabotage experience, unfortunately. And this can have a crippling impact on how society sees us and the labels. And this is why I think labels can be extremely unhelpful when we're applying labels to sexuality. Sexuality is very subjective. It's not black and white. It's not, I'm straight, so I'm 100% straight from the day I'm born to, the day I die. I don't think there's such a concept of, 100% straight as well. And again, something about expectations. Who do we admire? Often there's so much value placed on admiring the kind of macho male, the typical macho male. You need to be built in such a way, you need to behave in such a way, you need to talk in such a way. And I think this is where, unfortunately, where I've seen with some clients in the past where it can become difficult, that where is the stage that I'm admiring or praising this masculine male, and where is the fine line between sexually starting to like this masculine male as well. We will touch on that later on as well, how praise and admiration can sometimes be confused as sexual thoughts as well, and where do we kind of put that line. And unfortunately, if in early life you may have experienced some sort of trauma, especially sexual trauma, and due to those sexual traumas or difficulties, unfortunately, what can happen then is that boundaries become unclear. Where do I put the boundary then? So unfortunately, that can happen as well, and we will be talking and focusing about that later on as well. So one thing that I really wanted to touch on, when we are growing up.
Sorry, sure. I think with the audio, there seems to be a bit of issue. I don't know if it's disconnected or.
Can you hear me okay, or is it?
There's just like this background noise. I'm not sure what it is, basically.
Is that any better, or?
I don't know what it is. It's like frequency or something after you speak. I don't know if
is that every time I speak, or?
It's gone now. I don't know why you didn't from the last on. No, it's okay.
I did nothing. Is that better now, or?
It's really better now. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So sorry, I was explaining when we are growing up on a CBT kind of model and a CBT perspective. When we are growing up, we start developing ideas and concepts about ourselves, world and the future, and other people. Okay, so I'm going to use a really kind of typical example of, let's say you have a pretty stable upbringing, no is, loving family. Usually we start developing positive views and ideas about ourselves, that I am lovable, sorry, people love me, they trust me, I can trust them. So we have a pretty kind of solid and rounded idea of ourselves when we're growing up. And then when we're growing up, again, I'm going to use an example. If there's no major wars or traumas or difficulty, we start developing ideas about the world as well. The world is a safe place. The world is a nice place. The future is good. I can achieve something in this future, and the world will accept me as well. You know your position in the world. And of course, if you have a pretty, typical, okayish, stable upbringing, you'll start forming ideas about others as well. That I can trust others, others trust me, others love me, others are not critical, they're not there to hurt me as well. And this cognitive triad is really, really important when we're thinking about self-esteem, and also thinking about self-esteem when we experience same-sex attraction thoughts. So if self becomes compromised, so maybe I don't know myself that well, maybe I do like males, or maybe I do like females, I'm not sure, maybe it's going one way or another way. Self becomes compromised, okay? And then, of course, my world will become compromised as well, because if I'm living in a world where such thoughts, feelings, or behaviors are considered extremely negative, they're looked down on, in fact, you might be punished for having such thoughts, or you may be given constant examples of history or certain Quranic quotes where, XYZ, and there was a story where they experienced such thoughts and they were destroyed, your concept of the world will become compromised. So maybe it's not as safe, the world, and maybe the future is not as great as I was thinking it is. And of course, your concept of others will become compromised as well. Will others accept me now? Will they judge me, or will they become critical? So if you think about this, when self, world, and others becomes compromised, your self-esteem can really, really suffer, because you do not know where you belong with yourself, you do not know where you belong with other people, and you do not know where you belong in the world as well. And therefore, anxiety and depression can really, really kick in at this point. And what we do know, and what research tells us, unfortunately, people from the LGBT community or people who are having same-sex attraction thoughts have more vulnerability to depression, anxiety, and mental health problems. And one of the reasons is that self-world and others becomes very compromised, and it becomes very difficult. And also, if you think about it, if I'm having certain negative thoughts about myself, how do I have my needs met in a world which might be so judgmental, not compassionate as well? So if the world is not compassionate or and is judgmental to me as well, we'll pick up some of those ideas of how to behave with myself as well. So I'll become extremely critical with myself. I'll lose that compassion of towards myself as well, because the world has now become a scary place. And of course, if I'm struggling to trust others as well, the likelihood that I will seek support and help in that world will become compromised as well. So I hope that makes sense. I don't want to go into too much detail about that. I just wanted to kind of use it as a kind of like a reference point, because it will help explain my next slide a lot better as well. So as I said, when we are growing up, we develop core concepts, and in therapy, we call these core beliefs. So all our early life experiences influence our core beliefs about self, world, and others. And these core beliefs are they're almost like these universal, concrete beliefs I have about myself. And these are my deep down beliefs. This is how I think about myself, how I see myself, and how I see other people and the world around me. And it's often very hard to shift these beliefs. And deep down in CBT, the kind of argument is that there are three needs coming from those core beliefs: the need for acceptance, the need for achievement, and the need for security. That if these three needs are met, we can often feel like we have a good level of self-esteem, and depression and anxiety is unlikely to set in. However, if these three needs are not being met, that's when it becomes problematic. So if you think about it, I need my acceptance, of course, as human beings, because we're social beings, we're living in a culture, we're living in a society, we all need some level of acceptance. This can be subtle acceptance. You know, I want my parents to approve of me. I want my friends to approve of me. It can be as subtle as that. But what happens if I'm having thoughts of same-sex attraction? Then I need to maybe belong to a society or a group that will accept me or meet my needs in that respect. But what if that society that I'm trying to fit into or belong is in conflict with all my other values and beliefs? And this is where it becomes really tricky. So the need for acceptance becomes extremely hard. And this is where I see a lot of my clients that I see in clinics almost living these double lives. You know, they're still praying, they're still, you know, going to mosque, they're still doing all their things which is expected from them in their family and in their culture, because that need for acceptance is being met within the family. But then, unfortunately, their other sexual needs, maybe their needs to just be completely themselves with somebody else, they have to find that need somewhere else. And this is where you might start kind of joining groups, forums, going to certain places, maybe some clubs or places that you think, okay, these are like-minded people who will really like me and accept me. And you start finding an identity there. The problem is both places where you are meeting those needs are in conflict with each other. And this is where it becomes difficult for that individual as well. Again, that need for achievement. We all want to do well in our life. We're all striving to do something as well. And that comes from expectations as well. If that need for achievement is not being met, my self-esteem will suffer. So if I'm having a great matter of conflict with myself and my identity in terms of I might be having thoughts of liking men, in terms of me needing that need for achievement, in terms of getting married, having children, you know, meeting my cultural expectations, my parental expectations, that need is not being met. again, my self-esteem will suffer as well. Then the need for security. And this is a massive one, because what can happen, let's say, I don't mean security just in the sense I'm safe, like nobody attack me. I mean, even security in relationships. How realistic is it that if I'm having thoughts of, let's say, if I'm a female like in female or a male like in male, how do I achieve that security in my relationship if that's something that I need to keep hidden all the time, or I can't tell anybody else about it? Am I not allowed to have long-standing subsisting relationships then? Can I only have casual relationships then? Is my need for security only going to be fulfilled if I get married in a heterosexual way? And this is something really important to explore in therapy as well, where you feel safe as an individual and how your needs for security are being met as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, as you mentioned here, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think it's in the West where almost, you know, we all always talk about self-actualization. We don't realize that we've got all those levels beneath, which almost, you know, like we're in a city where there, or a country where there isn't war. So, you know, in Islam, we have the base need of aman, of peace. You know, how does someone feel secure there? Okay, we have that sense of salamty or peace, which is in there. And I think if that base psychological need isn't there, so if we're disturbed, especially I think in sexual identity, if our base need of our identity as who we are as a gender, you know, if our gender is compromised, or we're not sure how the self is, then that's such a, I would argue that's like a such a base need. How do I define myself? That if that isn't stable, then we can never reach self-actualization, because that base need is in conflict. And yet in the West, we're lucky we can focus on self-actualization, because for a lot of us, we have got food, shelter, warmth, rest, that you know, that's already there for us.
Thank you. I think Brother Ali's made a really important need there, that some of us may come from places where basic needs cannot be met, and therefore to meet the higher needs of self-actualization is going to be extremely difficult as well. And I guess I wanted to include this Maslow's hierarchy of needs just to give everyone some sort of insight, and I guess to normalize, we all have needs, and I guess there's no shame about talking about these. These are innate biological sexual needs and desires. Unfortunately, we may seek help, support from a place where they may make us feel ashamed for having such a need. They may make us feel guilty for having such a need as well. And that can be an unhelpful process, because A, I'm not validating my need, and B, they are denying you of having that need as well. And validation is a very, very important concept when meeting or reaching that top, the self-actualization. Because if none of my needs are validated, how do I meet self-actualization? And if that validation does not even come from me, it will be extremely difficult for me to function in society, or even function with myself in a healthy way, until I reach the top of that pyramid. And I guess an important point I want to make here is that we all have sexual needs. We all have desires. And I'm not going to go into the kind of biology of this in terms of how the amygdala in the brain works and the biological kind of functioning of this. But I think a common ground is that we all have sexual needs and desires. How they manifest is a different, it's a matter of opinion. It's a matter of, who's going to make judgment of that. None of us can make a judgment on something that is there from the day we are born. It's something normal. It's something that we should be aware of and not ashamed of. Of course, if that need is being met in a way that makes us feel ashamed, that's something we talk about in therapy. But what I really want to stress here, that having basic need for intimacy, basic need for sex is nothing to be ashamed of. It's something that needs to be normalized and talked about. Unfortunately, I see such a large number of clients in therapy where they may have not been abused themselves, but subjected, or they've witnessed a lot of abuse, or they've witnessed where unhealthy relationships were taking place. So their sense of how to have a sexual need met is very skewed compared to somebody who may have witnessed healthy relationships around them as well. And of course, the way we meet our needs affects our self-esteem as well. So for example, really trivial example here. Right at the bottom, there is a basic need for to meet your hunger. We need food because hunger is our basic drive. That's a basic need. Okay, so when we experience that basic drive, I'm hungry, first of all, it needs validating that in fact I am hungry. So if you can imagine, if you're a child and you're telling the significant other in your life, I'm hungry, and the adult's turning around like, no, you're not, no, you're not. Eventually, you're going to become a bit frustrated, a bit angry, and then you may start believing, actually, I am not hungry. So I've not even validated that, and I've denied that need, and I might stay the night, hungry. So how I meet that need depends on how I'm feeling around my behavior as well. So if I'm hungry, if I, talk to somebody, ask my mum for some food, she gives them that food, that need is met, I feel good. She felt good about it by feeding me as well. That will help me grow in terms of my development and self-esteem as well. So let's say, for example, I'm having thoughts that, I've got thoughts about men, I'm having sexualized thoughts about men, or I might be feeling aroused by these thoughts about men. And the person who I'm disclosing this information to might not validate that, they might just be extremely dismissive, that's disgusting, you shouldn't think like that, you'll go to hell, you'll burn in hell for this. How will that make you feel? Of course, that will make you feel extremely guilty, ashamed, and disgusted of yourself. So the validation did not happen. In fact, the response was dismissive. So I now feel disgusted with myself. Eventually, we start believing that, just like we start believing I'm not hungry, we start believing maybe I am a disgusting, unworthy, horrible person. And that has a massive impact on how you live your life and what activities you engage in then. So if I'm disgusting, if I'm unwanted, if I'm unworthy, I will engage in more reckless and risk-related behaviors, which will reinforce that guilt, that in fact I am disgusting and guilty and horrible, and therefore unworthy of anything good in my life. So sorry, I know I'm rambling on there, but I hope that these kind of vicious cycles which get created from the way we think, feel, and behave, and also thinking about validation, which is really important, can really inform how we deal with our sexual identities and sexual behaviors, and what are healthy sexual behaviors and healthy ways to meet your needs, rather than unhealthy ways to meet your needs, which are often driven by a negative emotion. And what we do know, nothing ever comes good from a negative emotion. Shame, disgust is an unhelpful emotion which does not help with growth. We need empowerment and enablement. So if I can empower myself, that, okay, I have these thoughts, but what's a healthy way of meeting that need? I will enable myself and enable my self-esteem as well. Sorry, Brother Ali, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, no, absolutely what you're saying in terms of shame as versus I am wrong versus I did wrong, and that's very true. So people with SSA have been told by that community that, I am haram, essentially, isn't it? This is haram. So people think I am haram because I have these feelings versus you have these feelings and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them to you, but you then have a choice. It doesn't make it an identity. It doesn't make it as I am embodied that. Instead of me feeling something, it shifts to an identity because we've been shamed by it. And I think that's that's very important, that we get to decide what our identity is, rather than that being forced upon us, or it's something which is because of shame, we're conforming to society in a certain way, where we're doing people pleasing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think, addressing those unhelpful emotions are really important, and also people pleasing. What we do know, unfortunately, people with low self-esteem, they're going to be extremely guilty of the people pleasing. And I guess that's in their need for acceptance, the need for that approval in that people pleasing as well, because of that negative core belief about themselves. So these are some of the kind of concepts we were talking about, the core beliefs. These are developed from the early life experiences, self-world and others, and these are often quite universal. They stay with us. From those core beliefs, we then develop rules and assumptions, and these are often like if and then. So for example, if I've been abused in my early life, or sexually abused, my core belief might be unworthy or unlovable. I'm unworthy, I'm disgusting, I'm dirty, or unlovable. It could be that the relationship with the abuser was that he or she made you feel wanted during that abuse, unfortunately. So a rule of living can come from that only if I am sexually active with another male or a female, then that can make me feel accepted. And these are some of the unhelpful rules of living that we can develop over time in our life, which will impact our self-esteem as well. Another example is if my core belief is maybe I'm unwanted, unlovable, or I'm a failure, my rules of living will be then, I need to please others, then I feel wanted. I need to go that extra mile, then I feel like I've achieved something. I need to be absolutely 100% in my work, that kind of perfectionist attitude, then I feel wanted. And again, I think society has these rules as well, that only if you like 100%, perfect person, you pray, you marry, you have kids, then you are accepted. It's a very black and white idea, these rules of living. They're often inflexible, they're often rigid, and they're often unattainable as well. We all have these rules of living in the background somewhere, and we need to be aware of these. Again, like I said in the beginning of the talk, knowledge is power. The more you understand yourself and your rules of living, the more you will be able to be more accepting of yourself and introduce flexibility in these as well. Another rule of living, of course, is thinking about even your relationships or your identity. So even, if I am in a heterosexual relationship, then I am accepted. If I am not in that, then obviously there's no acceptance. And again, I guess it's thinking about the middle line there as well. So essentially, some of the signs and symptoms of low self-esteem is being extremely critical. And with self-critical attitude comes excessive responsibility with that as well. So often what we see with clients with low self-esteem is that I'm to blame. If anything goes wrong, I'm to blame. So I'm experiencing these thoughts, so I'm to blame. There's no recognition. Maybe these thoughts are automatic, or maybe this is an inner drive, this is a biological need. Because I am having these thoughts of same-sex attraction, I must criticize them myself, and I am the one who should take responsibility for this 100%. There's hypersensitivity to criticism as well. What we do know, people with low self-esteem try their best to avoid any criticism, and it's generally unliked. Chronic indecision-making and fear of making mistakes. Again, that perfectionist attitude and that worry, I can't upset anyone. And therefore it's difficult to be extremely decisive. Excessive willingness to please others and unwillingness to disagree. That can become extremely conflicting, thinking about certain cultures and religions where people I often see in clinic are forcing themselves to be something they are not. They're forcing themselves to please their local religious group, their local culture, their family, again, not validating their needs and not accepting that, yeah, that part of me is there as well. And I think that comes the perfectionist attitude, an extreme feeling of guilt, excessive criticism, excessive responsibility taken for my thoughts and feelings. There will be excessive guilt. And what we do know, when there's excessive guilt, often people find it difficult to tolerate these negative emotions. And therefore, we will look for quick fixes or instant gratification as well. And this is another thing that we talk about in CBT therapy, emotionally driven behaviors. So a really quick example of that could be, I'm feeling really, really guilty, awful and horrible for having these thoughts. It's making me feel really low. I feel absolutely horrible and disgusted in myself. And therefore, I am really struggling to experience this emotion. I need a quick fix. I need to feel good in myself. So what you might do, unfortunately, what can happen in some people that I've seen in clinic, they may say, do you know what, I was feeling so bad. I just need to escape. I need to escape my family. I need to escape these feelings. So, I went and had some casual sex. It's like, okay, how did that make you feel? And they said, well, actually, it was good. It made me feel that sense of relief. I got it out. All those thoughts, feelings were out of my head for some time. Unfortunately, the short-term relief's the immediate result. The long-term consequence of that is that you're back at square one. I still feel disgusted with myself. And this is what can happen with emotional-driven behaviors, that you get stuck in that cycle of guilt, instant kind of gratification, and guilt around and round again. So another thing with low self-esteem comes compensatory behaviors. And I'm just conscious of time, and I'll touch on this really, really quickly. Often, if I feel unworthy of myself or feel low in myself, I will compensate for that in some way or another. So I see a lot of men and women in clinic where they may have recognized at some point they had thoughts of same-sex attraction, and they had to compensate for that. So I had to work harder to please my parents. I got married when I was younger to make sure I never disappoint anyone. Or I acted even straighter to ensure I do not, disclose to anyone, or in any way that does not get out. And you need to be, again, really careful of these compensatory behaviors, because they can have damaging impact on you in the long run. Are you living because of your fears and anxiety and these inner thoughts and core beliefs? Or are you genuinely taking that action in your life? And you need to be really honest with yourself and opening yourself. And again, this is where good therapy occurs. If you have that really good relationship with your therapist, you can look at the pros and cons of your compensatory behaviors as well in that respect. So sorry, something that we've been touching on, these vicious cycles. And I won't go into too much detail because I've already gave a lot of kind of examples on this. So if you think about it, you have your thoughts. I'm ugly, no one loves me, I'm unlovable. You have those negative, low esteem kind of thoughts. That makes me feel upset, down, sad, depressed. Physically, it's going to have an impact on me as well. I might feel quite tense, quite heavy in myself. So I need some sort of instant gratification or a need to be met, which that emotion is producing. So the behavior might be some sort of sexualized behavior. So this can be, I know somebody was asking in terms of, it could be masturbation, it could be watching some sort of porn, or it could be sex with somebody else. Again, because I'm feeling low, I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling awful in myself, I need that escape, because I've been never taught what's good escape, bad escape, healthy escape, non-healthy escape. That's a behavior that I might use. Again, in the short term, relief, it was quite nice. I got that sense of relaxation. In the long term, I feel that guilt again, and then I'm back to my original thoughts, and that cycle kicks off again. So as Brother Ali mentioned as well, and as we talked about guilt, it's fused with shame. It's a very difficult, horrible emotion, and it's a disabling emotion. It's not an empowering emotion. I think sometimes guilt can be helpful. A really trivial example of this, let's say, I don't know, let's say I've eaten too much today and I've eaten some of the wrong stuff. Like, I don't know, I had a lot of cake or chocolate or crisp, just what we've all been doing in lockdown, I guess. That might make us feel a bit shameful. It might make us feel guilty. And that can be a drive then that actually tomorrow I might do a longer workout, I might go for a longer jog. And that can be helpful guilt or some kind of enabling emotion that come from that. However, if the guilt is excessive and it's fused with shame, it does not help your growth. It does not help your development, and it will not help you empower yourself as well. And feelings of guilt and shame will just drive that cognition, that core belief, I am a bad person. And often guilt is also related to reputation and approval seeking. So obviously, if I've got some sort of reputation in my family, if I've got reputation in my community as well, I will feel extremely guilty if I do anything that is not in accordance with the rules and expectations of that society and culture. And therefore, I'm constantly seeking their approval, and therefore I can never, ever disclose what I am thinking or feeling deep down. You may have a bit of a kind of a hidden secretive life, maybe, where you might be acting upon those desires and feelings. Again, there's a massive conflict there, and that will make you feel guilty later on, and you're constantly stuck in that cycle. And it's thinking about, how do I meet that middle ground? But that needs to be from you, and it does not need to come from shame. It needs to be coming from a good place as well.
I think that's really important in terms of the approval seeking. A lot of people come in and they'll say, Ali, I'm attracted to this person. And, you know, I'd say, okay, what is it that you want? They'd be like, we want that person to recognize me, to approve me. And I'd be like, okay, what if that person, or if another person comes to you, or if it's a man, if another man comes to you and he provides that approval, they say, actually, no, it's not the same. So again, it's important to see, like, when we are approval seeking, is that a healthy approval seeking, or if it's just focused on one individual. And we find this a lot in that, okay, oh, this person, he appears, he looks good, so suddenly I have the shame inside of me which says I don't look as good as that person. And suddenly if that person says something, then that carries, for us, that's going to carry more weight, just because we've encountered a shame level where we've put that person on a pedestal. And so I think it's very important to see, when we are seeking approval, whether that is a valid approval. I mean, like, obviously, if I'm at work and I'm doing my job and I'm seeking approval from my employer, then obviously that's a valid form of approval seeking, because we need that for guidance. But when we're seeking approval which is coming from a place of shame rather than a place of authentic needs, then that's where it can be maladaptive, like you're saying.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brother Ali. I think that helps kind of shine that light on approval seeking where it's helpful, but then when it becomes maladaptive as well. And I've seen that a lot in many clients who have thoughts and feelings of same-sex attraction, that I'm looking for the approval of the other male, but is that a validating approval, or is it a maladaptive approval? Is that sexual approval something healthy? Is that actually meeting my need, or is it meeting my primitive need? That's something to think about in therapy as well. Again, understanding your needs, understanding your behaviors, and understanding the thoughts, the driving force behind that. So when we think about approval seeking, we need to think about, well, where am I even finding my self-esteem? Where are the places I'm looking to help build my self-esteem? And this is an experiment. This is no right or wrong about this. You know, we're not here to make any judgment whatsoever. And in therapy, it's really good to open about and really be honest about what you have tried to do to find your self-esteem. I've seen so many people going through so many different journeys. So they might be thinking, okay, I went on the Pride March, I went on to all sorts of LGBT groups because I was trying to find my place. And I'm like, cool, that's actually really, really understandable, because I can see you were looking for some sort of approval there. You were desperate. You went against, you know, all the other kind of culture and religious expectations and beliefs because you were seeking approval. I understand. I respect why you did that. That's completely understandable. And some people may experiment sexually as well, again, to have that need met for their self-esteem. I think, sometimes there's this macho kind of hetero attitude that if I sleep with X amount of people, my self-esteem really grows as well. Essentially, that's really unhelpful and unhealthy, because we are measuring self-esteem through sexualized behaviors. And what we do know from, healthy childhood, where that occurs is unfortunate. It can really damage that individual, where I'm measuring my self-esteem through my sexualized behaviors. So we need to understand, how am I currently, or where am I currently seeking approval, and where am I trying to actually find my self-esteem? And like I said, it's a journey. Some people become extra religious to maybe compensate to find that approval and find their needs to meet their self-esteem. Some people may go on the complete other end of the spectrum. So they're like, oh, I'm going to rebel now. I'm going to be, doing everything under the sun because I'm finding my place. Unfortunately, what we do know is when extreme ends of the spectrum happen, in the quest to find your self-esteem, often it makes you feel worse than better. And that's really shocking, the irony and the paradox there. I set out to find my peace and self-esteem on those extreme ends of the spectrum. And unfortunately, it's left me more damage and suffering more, rather than what I actually set out to do. And I think this is where therapy can be really helpful, that you have a completely non-judgmental person in front of you to really explore these ideas, rather than just acting on whim or acting on your emotions, which are often unhelpful. Like we said, acting on guilt or shame can take us to dark places. Let's talk about this. Let's open it up. Let's discuss it. How are your needs being met? And there's so many ways to meet your needs.
Absolutely. And I think just to put in social media and like apps that people kind of use to say, okay, how many likes am I getting? Or am I, some people on these apps and they're thinking, oh, how much attention am I getting from other people? And that's being used as a way to validate themselves, rather than the validation coming from a friend which has known them for 10 years, or, kind of a healthy validation, and rather than the validation coming from, oh, just because I've got this many likes and so on, and that constant need for approval, because the self-esteem isn't there. They're not happy, these people, they're not happy with themselves, so they need that constant, approval, which is coming from outside. So that's really beautiful. And I know you've got something there on the drivers and threats, and how that builds our incongruence further.
Absolutely. This is just, I guess, just to conceptualize what might be happening psychologically, because sometimes it's really helpful to have that on pen and paper in front of us. Often we're so confused. I usually use the example of like when people come to therapy, it's like a big box of Christmas lights. It's all tangled, it's all a mess. And part of therapy is just untangling everything and trying to make sense of things. And I like this model because it really kind of describes in a simple way, we all have drives. So whether these drives are our sexual desires or needs, or whether these drives are, I don't know, cultural drives, expectations, family expectations, but all those drives are constantly being met by threats. So I have a sexual needs, but the threat is shame, or threat is being, being called haram or being ostracized in my community. I have a drive that I need to get married by a certain age, but my threat is that maybe I won't be able to consummate the marriage, or maybe I won't feel that way towards my wife. We're constantly being faced, even mentally in ourselves, by drives and threats. So I have a drive to do well, but then I'm criticizing myself. And this is where the self-esteem comes in. So I might have a drive that I need to do well, but I'm constantly hating myself and constantly criticizing myself. I might have a drive to achieve well, do well socially, but my threat is that, people will out me, people will maybe feel disgusted by me. So there's constantly drive, threat. And this can be a very stressful and anxiety-provoking experience. And what we do know, people who are experienced to stress and anxiety for long periods of time, unfortunately, can become more prone to depression and make themselves ill as well, because there's this constant drive, threat battle going on in their mind. Your sleep becomes disrupted, your appetite becomes disrupted, you become depressed, so you might sleep more, you might not even leave the house, because I'm constantly in drive and threat mode. What I am not doing is living a valued life. And this is where the buffers come in, and thinking about what can help soothe me in a healthy way rather than in an unhealthy way. What can soothe the threats? What can soothe the drives? And how can I reach that middle ground? So I guess that's soothing. We need to think about, and I know lots of people are asking about practical ways of building your self-esteem as well. One of the ways is thinking about compassion. And compassion can be sought through your religion, your spirituality, your family, and even in yourself. I think compassion starts in yourself first before you start seeking that anywhere else. And an example I usually use to most of my clients is, let's say, for example, a friend came to you and they're saying, you know, I'm hating myself. I feel disgusted for myself. I'm having these same-sex attraction thoughts. What would you say to that friend? Would you be as critical? Would you be as demeaning? Would you be as invalidating? How would you demonstrate that compassion and acceptance to your friend? Would you block them? Would you say to them, right, that's it, I'm never ever going to talk to you again? Or would you place conditions on them? I will talk to you, but you need to drop all those thoughts and feelings. Or I will talk to you, but you need to see some sort of mullah first, or you need to go through some extreme kind of, I don't know, conversion therapy or religious kind of training. So essentially, compassion is not conditions. We need to think this first, because when we apply conditions to relationships, what we do know, the relationship starts to fail. So if I apply conditions to myself, I myself and my relationship with myself will fail as well. Compassion is being completely non-judgmental, and it's being accepting. So I need to be mindful, recognizing what my triggers are, recognizing what my thoughts are, and recognizing where these thoughts, needs, and feelings are coming from. And that's really early on in the talk when we talked about early life experiences and doing the formulation and understanding your core beliefs. Self-kindness, being supportive to yourself, empowering yourself, and enabling yourself. Okay, there's other ways needs can be met as well. There's healthier ways, sporting activities, starting your own support group, you know, reading books, starting up some sort of voluntary work or charity work. You demonstrating self-kindness on yourself and others will really increase that self-esteem as well. And connectedness, we really need to think about who we are connecting with and who is helping us to grow as well. We all make mistakes. We need to normalize this process that it's completely normal and okay to have sexual needs and desires. It's completely normal and okay to have same-sex attraction thoughts and desires. In fact, I think there was a really good survey that was done by a psychologist in America, where he just kind of interviewed like 1,000 random people. And it was shocking the amount of people actually had some thoughts of same-sex attraction at some point in their life. But I guess what was the most powerful thing that I took away from that did not define them as who they are as a person. That was just a part of their thought. And I guess that brings me onto the next part of the talk about ego syntonic and ego dystonic thoughts. So these are some terms that we often use in OCD and treating OCD. So some people may come to me in clinic saying, I'm having these horrible intrusive thoughts or images actually that are coming to my mind. So I might have this thought of being a female might say having the thought of sexual attractive thoughts to another woman, or a male might say I'm having these really intrusive, horrible, inappropriate thoughts about another male. Or it can be even a graphic image that comes into my mind that I might be performing a sexual act on another male, or something really graphic and upsetting. And often they're really, really upset by these images, and they try to kind of push them away, and they hate themselves and they feel disgusted. And because I'm having these thoughts and images, I therefore must be gay. You know, I think, therefore I am, that kind of philosophical stance. And I guess what ego syntonic and ego dystonic kind of differentiates are ego syntonic thoughts are those thoughts that are in harmony with your values and with your religion, culture, and upbringing. And ego dystonic thoughts are thoughts that go against your values and upbringing. And I guess something really powerful in this is that if you have a thought that works against your values and your identity, it makes you feel guilty and sad. And often people don't want to feel guilty and sad. And actually what I tell them, it's kind of good that you do feel guilty and sad, because it shows that you are value driven. You've got some morals here, you've got some values, you've got some good parts to you. Because if it didn't do anything to you whatsoever, what does that tell you about your morals and values? Because the irony here is often people who say, I have the graphic images or these thoughts of same-sex attraction, I must have no values, I must be a disgusting person. Well, if you were so disgusting, you wouldn't feel disgusted by it. And the very fact that you're having these ego dystonic thoughts kind of show that actually they're working against your value system. And ironically, what research tells us as well, I think the first mention of inappropriate and intrusive thoughts was in religious gatherings, that people would have extremely intrusive thoughts in a religious gathering. And I find that really kind of, it still resonates with me, because a lot of my clients I see often say, I have these really inappropriate thoughts when I'm in a religious gathering or a function or something, and it makes me feel this, to the extent I've stopped attending now these religious gatherings because I'm worried, what if somebody finds out? And it's amazing how just that thought can be so powerful then to change your behavior and to even stop you from attending something which you may enjoy. I had a client a while back who even stopped going swimming, even stopped going to their local church, because they were so worried, I'm having these thoughts, what if I act upon them? Or what if something inappropriate happens? They actually became really depressed, and their self-esteem really dipped, because their self-esteem came from their sporting activities, their swimming. It gave them an identity. It gave them a religious identity by attending church. All that stopped because of that worry of this ego dystonic thought. So, don't freak out if you have completely inappropriate and intrusive thoughts. Again, it's completely normal and natural. The fact that you are freaking out kind of shows that you've got some insight, awareness. It's a good thing. You've got some values and morals driving you. And again, you need a safe place to talk about these. And this is why therapy is often helpful. Again, we cannot base our identity just on a thought which we may be having in our mind. So I guess finally, this kind of brings me near to the end of our talk. Self-esteem comes from valued living. And when I say values, I don't necessarily mean shared values with others. It's what you think is valuable to you. We use a patient-centered approach here. This is all about you. What you think will help you live, not in a constant state of conflict or constantly trying to fix an emotion or seek approval. What do I actually value? What do I enjoy doing? And living that valued life. Often there's a massive conflict that I'm not living a valued life. I'm living the values of other people. So my dad wanted this for me, or my granddad or my mum wanted this for me. But where are my values in that? How am I living a valued life? Or my feelings and emotions are driving these unhelpful behaviors. Again, reflect on this, think about this, and think about your day-to-day life in terms of the values you have and how you are living that value-based life as well. And I just wanted to include some graphics here that it's difficult, I guess, to even accept yourself as who you are if I never dive in to the more deeper cognitions and deeper core beliefs about myself. People often feel they accept me if I please them or behave in a certain way, but that's only tip of the iceberg. True acceptance comes when you know the person as a whole. And you'd be really surprised, people will accept you for who you are, and you will accept yourself for who you are when you start recognizing it's okay to have unhealthy, healthy, inappropriate, appropriate thoughts. We cannot base acceptance on conditions that only if I present as XYZ, only if I have XYZ thoughts, then I will be accepted, because that's completely unattainable, and it's accepting the whole person rather than just certain parts of a person.
Yeah, and I really like that visual because again, taking back to social media and, kind of when we see these figures, these celebrities, or if we're attracted to someone, we're only seeing, like in Islam, I always talk about the Zahiri versus the Batini. So I'm only seeing the Zahir, and this kind of society that we're in only focuses on the tip of the iceberg, the image and what the image shows, and whether you don't know what's happening in that life of that person. If I'm being attracted to someone, we're saying, okay, let's break down that attraction, and say, what I only know this much about that person when they've just walked past me. We were not seeing that who I am, which is at the bottom, and saying actually what makes that person, who they are. So I think similarly, when if we're only showing a little bit of ourselves, then surely people that we are then seeing and perhaps having, kind of like, why am I not as good as this person? Why does this person have everything? It seems like this person has everything. And then we realize what we're seeing is only, the tip of the iceberg of what's really happening with them. Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of close really with some final thoughts about self-esteem. I hope today's been helpful. I hope it's given some insight in terms of how self-esteem can be built, and also some tips and techniques. I think I've gone from it from the angle in terms of a CBT model, but also from the angle, the more you understand yourself, the more you will be able to help yourself. And with understanding comes acceptance as well. And I guess this is just a quote that I absolutely love, that we're often yearning and dying for acceptance and love from other people. And I guess, that's something I question my clients a lot, that how can you expect others to love you if I'm not loving myself? If I cannot tolerate myself or sit with myself as my whole self, how is it possible for others to do that as well and accept your whole self? So I guess, just some closing remarks, that self-esteem is not a straightforward topic. There's lots of facets to self-esteem, and it needs to be considered in a holistic way, not just from one lens. But I guess with self-esteem and opening up about self-esteem and talking about your sense of self and your identity, there needs to be a lot of compassion there, and a lot of value in terms of non-judgmental value being placed there as well. So you get more accepting of yourself, and you have choice then, because you've empowered yourself, how you're going to act upon creating a better self-esteem of yourself and building your self-esteem. And one thing that I really want to stress, self-esteem is a journey, okay? People who, and I know a lot of this happens on social media, they may present themselves with these miracle stories like, I've attained self-actualization and self-esteem. It's not long lasting. If you see self-esteem as a bit of a journey, just like you might be, creating a bit of a road, often in that road, there might be some potholes, some damage might get created in that road, and we need to go back and repair that road again. I guess that's how I see self-esteem in therapy. We're constantly laying out a road, and that road constantly needs repairing. And this is why it's really important you check in with yourself on a frequent basis, just to keep that self-awareness there, and keep that awareness of which needs need to be met when I am thinking of my self-esteem. It's never a finished project. It's always a journey.
Brilliant. Yeah. And it's, yeah, it is like it's so true. It's a journey, and it's not something like I'm in my best self-esteem state all the time. And it, like you said, it's different for different people of what self-esteem looks like. So thank you so much. I know we had some technical difficulties today, and we're a little bit over the time, but I know there's so many questions which have come in. Wow, there's like 25 questions. So I'm just looking at it at present, and I think some of these have been you've been looking at them as we've been going. So let me just pick some at the moment. So someone's asked, how can I connect with you? And to kind of get more information from you. Zabair, what's the best medium?
I can send my email address, and then if anybody wants to contact me personally, by all means, they can they can do that.
Right. Okay. So whoever that is, you can get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to pass on those details. Jazakallah. So the next question is, if I experience a SSA moment, I feel collapsed and my self-esteem goes down negatively infinitely. What should a person experiencing this do every now and then?
I think this is a really common experience, that when people have that really strong drive and desire of SSA, all of a sudden that's when all the negative kind of feelings and beliefs come in to their mind as well. And I guess, again, there's no simple solution to this. It is work in progress. It's learning to tolerate those thoughts and feelings, because they will come and go. They will come and go. I come across so many books and so many kind of articles on the internet that, do a course and will get rid of your negative thoughts. Although that never ever works. The true sense is, and true therapy is, that thoughts will return. It's to tolerate, and it's learning to accept. And this is where acceptance comes from. That I will continue to have these thoughts. I will continue to have these feelings. How I react to them and what meaning I give to them, that's the crux of the issue. And I think that's where CBT can be really quite helpful, because we're looking at what meaning, how you're appraising those thoughts and feelings. Are they just thoughts and feelings that come and go every so often? A thought is just a thought. It's a thought. It's the meaning we give that. And learning distress tolerance skills. So some people, I often say to them that, just like for your physical health, in the house we have like a first aid box, like, you might cut your hand, or your child might cut their finger or something. We run to that first aid box, we soothe that person, help them calm down, show a lot of love, care and attention. Just like that, for our mental health difficulties, we need to have the same attitude. We need to have some form of first aid in our house for ourselves as well. So sometimes I tell a lot of my clients, create your own mental health first aid box, have some positive quotes in there, have a good song, which really makes you feel good instantly as well. Keep some of your key achievements in your life, which will help you boost your self-esteem when that cloud occurs. Giving yourself that soothing response and that validating response. So recognizing, yeah, I'm having that thought again about SSA. Actually saying it out open is less scarier than keeping it up in your mind. Be validating, yeah, I don't, it's upsetting me, it's causing me some distress. And then actually soothing yourself will be such a better approach, rather than letting that cloud really, get over you, ruin the rest of your day, and you withdrawing, because the more we withdraw, the more we ruminate about those difficulties anyways. So I hope that helps in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I can see, mashallah, someone saying therapist himself is looking very handsome. This realization is damaging my self-esteem. How will I work you in this case? And I think this is really important, that especially in the work of SSA, that if you do find a therapist, and that, we call it immediacy. So if you're actually having that interaction, that the therapeutic alliance is strong enough that you can tell that, and tell the therapist that that is what's experiencing, and the therapist can work with you with what's bringing out those beliefs and thoughts. What would you say, Zabair?
I think absolutely. We can experience all sorts of feelings and emotions in therapy, and we expect this. So attraction's not the only feeling or emotion you might experience. You may experience some hate. I remember with the client, I can't remember exactly what I said or what I did, but they said, I really felt some dislike towards you, because you almost came across, I think I said a quote, and they said, that's something my dad used to say, and it almost made me feel that hatred towards you. And there was a real shift in the therapeutic relationship. So I guess some of these, first of all, thank you for the compliment, even in lockdown. That's quite complimentary. But on a serious level, these are kind of relationships and dynamics we're always mindful of. And again, it's really good to be honest and open about these dynamics, so you and your therapist can work together and contract together how to manage those dynamics and work with them. So, you know, this is something I'm sure, Brother Ali, you've experienced as well. We have this day in, day out. It can be positive, it can be all sorts of emotions, jealousy, hatred, pleasing, a bit of over-pleasing I have sometimes as well. Of course, whatever happens in your life outside will happen in the therapy room as well. And I guess as therapists, you know, we are human as well. We'll have feelings and thoughts about the client as well. And we're very open about this. We're not immune from such thoughts and feelings as well. I guess it's that self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Just running through these, and I know we this question is asking about connection between self-esteem and addiction to pornography and masturbation. And I know we covered this in terms of our compensatory behaviors that we talked about. Someone's asking about practical tips to increase self-esteem. So I think there's a few, and I think coupling with that, I think someone was asking if they have an 8-year-old and they want to describe self-esteem, or an adult, how would you describe very simply what self-esteem is, and how would you practically give tips to increasing self-esteem?
Sure. One really good way to introduce the concept of self-esteem in a, you know, in a less threatening and less intrusive way to your children. One example that I've used, and again, the examples that I'm giving you, it's not one size fits all. It's trial and error. Therapy is trial and error. One model might suggest one thing, another model. So you know, please do take these suggestions with a pinch of salt as well. I might, when I've done therapy with younger children, I might ask them, who do you look up to? Is it a famous footballer? Is it a famous cricket player? And then I ask them, what is it about them? And they might say, you know, oh, they're so cool in the way they look, the way they maintain their physique maybe, or it might be somebody, a kind of scientist they may have seen on TV reading something. And we talk about those words that you are describing to describe that person, those really complimentary, approving words. How can you use those words to apply them to yourself? And these are some of the kind of ways I introduce the concept of self-esteem to my younger clients, especially quite young clients who might not have an understanding of self-esteem. Often using role models, using examples is a really good way to introduce that concept to them. And also, if you think about it, let's just say, for example, I don't know, your child likes a famous footballer or something. You might say to them, okay, how do they look after themselves? How do they think? How do you think they feel about themselves and think about themselves? And they may say, well, actually, they take a lot of care of themselves. They really, you know, think positively about themselves and they work hard. And again, thinking about, okay, if that's that role model, what they're doing, how can I apply that to my life or my child's life as well, so they can look up to that as well and maybe implement some of those things as well. I hope that makes sense, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's quite a lot things in there, and jazakumullah khair. The next question, I always have this feeling, I have a friend who is masculine, straight, confident, and my self-esteem would increase, but this is now creating social anxiety and failing utterly to bond such a relationship with a person who I admire physically and personally. Please help, what should I do?
Okay, so there's a number of things that I'm picking up there. The first thing is what we call compare and contrast. So the grass is greener almost. So that person is better in physique. They've got X, Y, Z. I haven't. It's almost that, you know, comparing and contrasting. And that can be an extremely, unfortunately, kind of disabling impact that can have on your self-esteem, because I'm only comparing all the positive things that they have and not looking at what I have as well. So there's something about your thinking styles, maybe thinking about how you're comparing yourself in terms of evaluating yourself compared to that other person as well, and maybe being dismissive of your own positive things as well. And often what can happen in social anxiety, we become extremely self-focused. So what I mean by that, when we're in social situations, because I'm having these thoughts, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm coming across like X, Y, Z, we become, the focus of attention is so much on myself. I become extremely anxious then in social situations. So I might start sweating, I might get that fight and flight response, may become extremely tense, and I will withdraw. What we're not doing is focusing outwardly. We're becoming so subjective in our thoughts, so critical in our thoughts, that we're ignoring what's happening outwardly. So, you know, just some tips. Think about what function does that compare and contrast have? Is it okay to praise somebody for something that you do not have as well? And what is it that you have that maybe they do not have?
Absolutely, I think gratitude comes in usually there, doesn't it? As a is this a just comparison, or is it not? So no, beautifully put. We've got more people asking for contact. Is it okay if I share the email on the chat? Would that be okay?
No, that's perfectly fine.
Brilliant. So this is someone talking about girls being brainwashed, or and how this affects their marriage and their relationship with their children. And all of these girls are raised to have no self-esteem, confidence, or any basic identity. So yes, I think there's, I think especially in from a gender influence, we can see that, isn't it? That some societies kind of treat the male as you know, on a pedestal almost, and how, I guess what this person may be getting at is how, what we touched earlier, our earlier childhood experiences, how they then contribute later in life. Yeah,
I think, yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question, that, because unfortunately in some cultures, I think you're right, the women are brainwashed to meet the needs of others, meet the needs of your husband, meet the needs of your children, meet the needs of your parents. And there's no self-identity development there. And unfortunately, what can happen later on is that, let's just say, I don't know, for example, the children move away then. They've educated, married, gone. That woman often feels very lost and low self-esteem, because her sense of achievement was only coming from the role she was given and prescribed. And therefore, if that role is no longer then, you know, what is my identity? And I see a lot of this in clinic, unfortunately, where people become depressed. And I think you're right, there's something about being brainwashed to be in a certain role. But if we can't fulfill that role, then what is my identity?
Absolutely. We have another question asking about people going through severe anxiety disorder and have SSA. What would you recommend for treating anxiety?
So the evidence base suggests that cognitive behavioral therapy is really, really good for most anxiety-based disorders. Of course, there's other therapies out there as well. But most of the evidence kind of suggests that with CBT, you have good recovery with CBT from most anxiety-based disorders. This can be anything from generalized anxiety disorder, overthinking, to social anxiety disorder, or OCD or PTSD. There are other therapies out there. Some people kind of like to do a bit of pick and mix, but if you fully engage in just the CBT alone, there are good results there, and I see that all the time with CBT as well. However, I will, be completely honest here. CBT, like I said in the beginning, it doesn't have all the answers. Some people might want to go into a different kind of perspective with their difficulties. So for example, CBT doesn't go into much detail about relationship dynamics and processes, and often counseling or psychodynamic therapy is really good for that, whereas CBT is really good for the anxiety-based disorders. So that's, be mindful that I guess it's like medication. When you go to the doctor, he may give you paracetamol, that might not work, then you need another painkiller like ibuprofen or something. Talking therapies can work in the same way as well. And I noticed somebody asked about relapse. Is relapse possible in therapy? Just following on from that question as well. Relapse is possible. Just like any physical health problem as well, relapse can occur. And often in the last session, you do like a relapse prevention plan with your therapist. And the fact we do a relapse prevention plan kind of suggests that we know a relapse is going to happen, hence doing the plan. So again, I think perfectionism comes in there, that some people leave therapy thinking, right, okay, awesome, I'm cured now. I don't think there's any such thing as a cure. Like I said, it's work in progress. Always be mindful to check in with yourself. And I guess there's a difference between relapse and lapse. We all have lapses. We all have bad days. Relapse is when the symptoms come on for a long period of time and it's chronic. So again, no guilt, shame about that. We all relapse. That's perfectly normal. Just like we might relapse from a diet or some sort of physical health regime, your mental health is no different as well.
And beautiful. And, what you said about self-compassion. So here, it's not especially with something with SSA or with any other type of thing, it's not it's a journey. It's not, like we said, it's a destination, it's a journey. So you're going to constantly have that. Even self-esteem is a journey, like we were saying. I think additional to this, someone is asking if you have to go back to therapy, is that okay? So obviously, again, this is, kind of, I guess there's a stigma of people kind of sometimes feel that, oh, I'm in therapy. Oh no, I'm now going back into therapy. Yeah, what would you say about that?
I think there's absolutely no shame or embarrassment about going. I think there's a negative connotation. I think I'm making an assumption here, and please correct myself if I'm wrong. Sometimes there's an assumption that weak people go to therapy. Therapy is a sign of weakness. The irony is it takes power and courage to go to therapy, because you're going to be talking about some extremely difficult things, which people often run away from. And therapy is not easy. It's not for the weak. If it was for the weak, you wouldn't be able to engage. So, going back to therapy is not perfectly normal. I often say to my clients, give yourself 6 months, 12 months, consolidate the learning, try empowering yourself, try being your own therapist, come back if that's not working. That's the whole point of therapy. You might even need, you might not need the full, 12 sessions that you had. You might just need like a couple of sessions just to get you back on track again.
Absolutely. And, we have people now saying they've used other techniques like EMDR, which again is a really good technique to overcome trauma. And again, this is actually something, a lot we recommend, even for SSA, we recommend EMDR because it's proved effective in treating trauma. In discussing therapy, there's this question saying, can you sometimes go too fast in therapy for anxiety and then realize you went through the CBT too quickly? And I guess that's a big criticization of CBT, because it's short term in general when you're treating things. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think any therapy you can go fast. I think this is why it's really important to, I think it's problematic because let's be honest, unfortunately on the NHS, a number of sessions are only available. And I guess we need to make the most of those sessions. But I guess this is something that people forget, is that you can spread those sessions out. So you might have a session 1 week, then you might have a week's gap or 2 weeks gap. So you can practice the skills you've been learning. In that way, you might feel that actually therapy hasn't gone that fast. Often what I find with a lot of clients, if they're having like 6 sessions back to back, they feel it's gone fast because they've had no time to implement the techniques. So sometimes it's good to have a session, reflect for a week, apply those techniques, then have another session.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got questions, again, very similar to what we've discussed before about stopping acceptance seeking and validation coming from within. And I guess that's already covered in terms of the self-esteem and what we've been talking about, how to build that. We've got comments, again, is what you've mentioned, that there is this stigma which is causing and it's a huge block for many people. But inshallah, as we're doing, or one of the aims of we're doing webinars like this is to get rid of that stigma and saying, even in Islam, we're encouraged to consult. We're encouraged to consult and go and discuss instead of kind of just, kind of blocking that. So it's, I think that's definitely true. And I know you've just, one of the things you discussed was sports or exercise. So someone asking here is, what if they're not good in sports? How to then develop self-esteem for that?
So I guess, sorry, I was just using sports as one of the examples. You know, I'm being honest here. I've never played sports in my life. I absolutely hate, sports myself. And I think if I was to do sports, it'd work against my self-esteem rather than improve my self-esteem, because I'm just so bad at sports. The first parts of therapy is exploring what works for you and what's good for you. And this is where you need, again, that safe place to explore and understand yourself better. Sports is just a really common example, but there's so many other things that can boost a person's esteem. So for example, a lot of people start writing, creating a lot of forums on the internet where they're writing a lot of kind of inspirational blogs about themselves and their experiences. They might start engaging, or they might think, okay, I want to take a certain career path. So, okay, what can I start doing? What are the courses I can start doing? And that will really start building their self-esteem as well. So sometimes I guess we have to think out of the box, not the stereotypical things that we think that people might. And I think this is where the damage can occur as well. We have this assumption that certain activities will build your self-esteem, but it can work against you, just like the sports thing. So this is purely subjective. You need to think what's working for you and your self-esteem, none of the assumption making being created there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got Sheikh Hussain has asked a lot of questions and around SSA in particular. I'm just going to respond to some of them. And it's basically, if low self-esteem contributes to postponing things, procrastination, losing interest in this, what would you say that's a sign of low self-esteem?
There's so much research out there to suggest that procrastination is linked to low self-esteem. Now, the reason for that is one of the worries about low self-esteem is not getting something right or being criticized for it and not being able to tolerate that criticism. So we will worry about that work until we put it off because we're so worried about how it will be judged or how it will be coming across. But procrastination also occurs, thinking about the CBT model, when we suffer low self-esteem and have those negative thoughts, we feel low and down in ourselves. Because I'm feeling low and down, I don't have the motivation. Because I don't have the motivation, I can't do my work then. And that becomes a vicious cycle. Because I'm not doing my work, that's confirmation I'm not good enough. And this is where the procrastination can occur as well, because I'm lacking in the motivation. So there's masses of evidence and research out there to suggest that low self-esteem is pretty much connected to the low self-esteem and procrastination.
And I think,
and sorry, what was the other questions?
So the other questions are, is SSA forcing us to watching porn, or is porn forced us towards SSA? How to deal with it? And I guess that's a very individual question, isn't it? It's and it's an interesting way of looking at it. Has the attractions, because of the attractions, am I going to a behavior, or is the behavior, or is the, or is the material which is then attracting us? And I think there could be both, depending on how it is. And I would say that's, it depends on the individual. I don't know what you'd say on that one.
I think absolutely there's no clear-cut answer to that. It really depends on the individual's circumstances, individual's background, also the function in terms of why the individual might have been watching pornography. It might be just curiosity. So we have a different function for each behavior. The intention behind that behavior might be completely different from one person to the other. One person might be out of curiosity, one person might be for pleasure. So I guess if we're not aware of the function of what that behavior is serving, it's difficult to do a sweeping statement that, oh yeah, by watching SSA kind of porn, you're going to be addicted, or the other way around. I guess it's so hard to draw that generalization on that question. Really, really good question, which comes up so much. So difficult to put a generalized kind of answer to that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it is very good analysis of, is it the behavior that then causes further, or is it, and it's almost like a cycle, isn't it? Which
Cycle,
you're
yeah.
not wondering what it is. I guess we'll go for last question, because I'm aware it's always 2 hours now. So how to overcome body dysmorphic disorder, how to overcome genital size obsession. And again, a lot of things we have, and we've touched upon this, is the existence of body shame for a lot of people, in this comparison, and where the constant need for us to making that comparison, especially if we have unwanted SSA.
First of all, BDD, body dysmorphic disorder, is a massive difficulty. And I would urge anybody who experiences body dysmorphic disorder to be honest about that and reach for help. Because unfortunately, what the research tells us, there's a high mortality rate with body dysmorphic disorders. Fortunately, people who suffer such difficulties are more likely to harm themselves as well. And there's many reasons for that, just out of frustration or difficulties, because they just see no light at the end of the tunnel. I think, again, thinking about core beliefs and talked about that need for acceptance, need for achievement, and need for security, we really need to think about that and how body dysmorphic disorder comes from those core beliefs. That if I think that need for achievement can come through my body or the way I look, I'm going to keep on trying until I hit that perfect line. And what we do know, perfection never is attainable. It's a vicious circle. We're constantly trying to reach that perfect target, which gets further and further away. Obsession with genital size, that is so common. People might think, okay, that's a bit odd to ask this, but in therapy, this is something that every couple of months, there's a client. This is so common, and I think there's a massive social media kind of pressure here. There's so many expectations how we need to look and behave. And I think, the LGBT community has been absolutely, I think they've been portrayed so negatively and unfairly that, you need to look a certain way. If you identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, you need to be of a certain build, you need to be slim, you need to have a six-pack. So many unrealistic pressures, or even, let's go on the other extreme end of masculinity. If you're the macho male, you need to be so butch and built, and you need to be really bulked up as well. I think there's so many unhelpful ideas about society of how we should look and how identity should look and how our sexuality should look on the exterior, not just on the interior, which drives all these anxieties about genitalia size, about BDD as well. BDD does not only occur in men, it occurs in women as well. And BDD is very different from eating disorders. Often BDD is confused with eating disorders. It's not like eating disorders. But I just say, get good therapy, get good help, and recovery is possible. You can overcome that as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, especially with BDD, to get specialist help, which is around that. So you get the treatment that you need. And I know there's so many questions, but unfortunately we've kind of run out of time at present. I know I've been firing these to Brother Zabair. Thank you, honestly, thank you so much for your time I've taken from your Saturday.
No.
And I guess the concept of self-esteem is something which is so interesting, whether we look at it from, like you said, like an LGBT point of view, or even if we look at from people with SSA and how they're viewing self-esteem, and actually going to what you talked about, value-based living. Am I living to my own values? Am I not coming to what society thinks that, okay, I need to be married, or I need to, have a certain halo effect around me, which is saying, oh, this, mashallah, this person's really good, from a religious side, and really going into saying, what are my own values and what is haq, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَدِينَ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَ عَلَى دِينِ كُلِّهِ, the truth which will prevail over our faith, and this is the religion of truth. So I think the value-based approach honors what our truth is and what's true for us, rather than bowing down to what society is and having, like you said, unrealistic expectations of what masculinity or even what femininity is, and going through something which is more, which is coming from a value-based approach, which then aligns, is ego-systonic, as you've mentioned, aligns with our faith-based values. So yeah, so I don't know if there was any closing remarks as well you wanted to make on this.
No, I think you've summed that up really well, Brother Ali. I want to say thank you for everybody participating and answering the questions. If we don't ask, we'll never know, and if we don't ask, we won't get the help that we need. And I just want to stress, help and support is out there. This is a very difficult topic, and people go to religious leaders, spiritual healers, different types of therapists. There's no right or wrong answer. We're not here to judge as therapists. Like I said, we're here just to provide that safe place and help you guide yourself to a safe place and understand yourself better. The more you understand yourself better, the more you will be able to empower yourself and build your self-esteem as well. And it just comes to mind that it can be a very isolating process. Having same-sex attraction thoughts and feelings, it can be extremely isolating. It can be extremely difficult having those thoughts and feelings. But just a reminder out there that, you're not alone. You'd be surprised that many people are suffering and struggling with this. I'm not going to use the word suffering, because that almost makes it sound like an illness, which it is not. I think that's another thing that people often use, a kind of biomedical model to this, that, cure me. Is there something wrong with me? Again, accepting the person for who you are, not just making a judgment about you on just a thought that you are having. So yeah, I'd just urge anyone to see good therapy, seek good help, and recovery does happen. And like I said, it's a journey, and it's you finding yourself in your own journey.
Thank you so much. And I'd really like to honor Brother Zabair for being courageous to pick this topic and to speak, because I know it's especially in the Muslim community, it is something which is difficult for people to kind of address to it, and and I'd really like to honor his frankness and his honesty in kind of discussing that, and really putting the what strong support stance is that we have a non-judgmental approach to this, and again, going back to client self-determination, that it's the person who decides, would say, whether they choose to identify in a certain way or not, and then provide support. And for strong support, it's been a vacuum for a minority within a minority which identifies as same-sex attracted, but doesn't identify with the behaviors or the gay life or that type of model. But instead, we choose as Muslims to take a God-centric view, and our identity being in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, identity being within Him, rather than it being self-centered identity. I think that's really important, that if you have a safe space, if you're LGBT, you have a safe space, and you should have a safe space, because everybody deserves that respect. But also, if you're that minority which says, well, we do have these feelings, but we need support to say, okay, I have this, but it doesn't define me, and you know, kind of creating safe space for that in a way which is you know, respectful and kind of free of judgment of what the person needs. So thank you, you know, once again. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward the fantastic work that you're doing in the community at the moment. And you know, I think testament to today, where so many people have asked so many questions, I think it's definitely been a useful response. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the viewers and the people who've asked questions. And inshallah, our next webinar, I can tell, is actually Brother Zabair is aware of Dr. Haider Al-Hakim, who takes less CBT and more of a psychoanalytical view to sex and sexuality. So inshallah, we've seen CBT on this session and what the CBT framework is. And inshallah, next time, if you join us for our next webinar, we'll be discussing more the psychoanalytical approach to sex and sexuality. So Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and inshallah we meet soon.
Inshallah. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.